he has put hard pressure on Ukraine, making it more difficult for Ukraine to defend itself by pausing our military assistance and our intelligence sharing, whereas he put no concrete pressure on Russia. So he is objectively aiding Putin in his aggression right now.
Now, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, has said that both Ukraine and Russia will need to make concessions to reach a ceasefire deal. He was speaking on his way to Saudi Arabia for tomorrow's talks with Ukrainian officials who are reported to be proposing a partial ceasefire. Rubio has said the US has yet to determine what Russia is willing to concede. On this programme earlier, the former Foreign Secretary Lord Owen questioned why Russia was not at the talks.
Ukraine is under attack from Russia. And at all of these talks, where is Russia? Nowhere. Why are they not round the table? And why are all these presidents, and particularly the President of the United States, shooting his mouth day after day?
Well, the Prime Minister has spoken to President Trump and said he hopes there will be a positive outcome from the talks that will enable the US to resume providing military support and sharing intelligence with Ukraine. John Herbst is a former US ambassador to Ukraine. He's now director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council. Good evening to you, John.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Great to have you with us. We're hearing, albeit from some of the US delegation, that President Zelensky has apologized for that extraordinary exchange in the Oval Office a week or two ago. What do you think are the prospects for these talks? Of course, President Zelensky's not there. President Trump's not going to be there. But there are some pretty high-powered delegations from both the White House and from Ukraine.
Very important. We know that Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz met with the Russians a week ago, and now they're meeting with the Ukrainians, so that's a plus. What to expect depends. Right now, as your previous guest mentioned, Trump has put pressure on the Ukrainians, even though they've demonstrated a certain willingness to compromise concretely. None on the Russians who've demonstrated no willingness to compromise. I was glad to hear Secretary Rubio saying on the plane they're expecting compromise concessions from the Russians, but he hasn't seen anything yet. That's the first time we've heard that publicly since President Trump, on the second or third day of his new term, properly decried Putin as the impediment to a peace settlement. Because Trump has sounded very differently the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, do you take that as a signal of a perhaps more even-handed approach? Because we also had President Trump suggesting potential sanctions against Russia, which has been bombarding Ukraine. But I mean, until now, we've heard almost nothing about what the US is expecting of Russia, whereas Ukraine has already conceded that it's prepared to give up some territory, it's potentially prepared to give up some of its rare minerals and so on.
Well, people associated with the Trump campaign, who now are in the government, were talking for a couple of months about things Russia should expect to do and compromise on. One is the deployment of European troops to Ukraine. The other is to accept that the West would be sending weapons to Ukraine as part of any ceasefire deal to prevent future Russian aggression. But we know Lavrov and Peskov, the spokesman for Putin, have categorically rejected those compromises. As Rubio said correctly on the plane, we haven't seen what the Russians are willing to do. Now, President Trump saying maybe he needs to put pressure on Russia is nice, but the point is he has put hard pressure on Ukraine, making it more difficult for Ukraine to defend itself by pausing our military assistance and our intelligence sharing, whereas he put no concrete pressure on Russia. So he is objectively aiding Putin in his aggression right now. I'm not saying that's Trump's policy for the long term, but right now we don't know what Trump's policy for the long term is.
Yeah, I mean, we've got one of the papers here in the UK suggesting that America's ban on sending weapons and sharing intelligence with Ukraine could actually be lifted as a result of those talks today. Do you think that is a realistic prospect?
I think it is a possibility. And certainly President Trump himself hinted at that when he said, I think it was yesterday, that the pause could be ended soon. Let's hope that it is. But until it is, right now we have serious American pressure on the victim or serious Trump administration pressure on the victim and not on the aggressor. And that's seriously a problem for American interests and obviously a huge problem for Ukraine.
Yeah, what about this suggestion that Ukraine is pushing for a partial ceasefire in the sea and the sky, which could stop long-range strikes as a start of these negotiations? Again, it seems extraordinary to think that anything like that could be agreed without the Russians agreeing to it.
Well, of course not. Nothing can be agreed if the warring party, if the aggressor does not agree. It's an interesting proposal. I suspect that Putin will not go for it for the same reason he doesn't want to go for a ceasefire. He believes he can make more progress taking Ukrainian territory. He's hoping to kick Ukrainian forces out of Russia. And again, at the present time, the Trump team is making it easier for Putin to do that by denying Ukraine our intel sharing and our weapons. And that needs to end quickly, and I hope it will.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that could change quickly? Because we're already hearing, aren't we, from Ukraine that they fear that this is just leaving them so exposed because they're just, I mean, they simply don't have the defenses that they had even a few days ago.
My understanding is that, they still have a fair amount of weapons, but not having the intelligence which we provide over the last several days has been very costly to them. And the Russians are trying, even harder now, since the pause, to kick the Ukrainians out of Russian territory, which of course would be removing a serious bargaining chip for Ukraine before negotiations actually begin. And I don't understand why the administration is making it easier for Putin to do that. Again, that hurts American interests because we want Ukraine to emerge from this independent, viable, secure. And that has been the stated policy of President Trump. But he's not been pursuing the right steps if that's what the goal he seeks.
We're hearing that some senior British officials, including Jonathan Powell, who's one of the British Prime Minister's closest security advisors, have actually been out to Ukraine to advise President Zelensky and his team how to approach these discussions. I mean, how do you think they should be dealing with a leader like President Trump and his senior figures, including Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, who are going to be there at the talks starting tomorrow?
Zelensky has been an heroic wartime leader. So, he gets very high marks for that. But I think he misjudged President Trump and the Trump team when he was in Washington to sign the minerals deal, which of course is still unsigned. He should have raised his legitimate points about the need for security guarantees because Putin seeks to establish Russian political control over the country. He's not satisfied with the land he's already stolen from Ukraine. And Zelensky was right to point out that Putin is a bad faith actor who has violated many agreements. But by insisting on this and going on at length, I think he conveyed the wrong message to President Trump, who thought Zelensky was not truly interested in pursuing peace talks. And I believe Zelensky is. So that was a tactical error. Zelensky is now made up for it twice. He did it last week. Apparently he's done it today in Saudi Arabia. Hopefully we're past that. But again, the key is, what does President Trump want? Does he really want a durable peace where Russia's unable to take effective political control of Ukraine? He said that for months. If he still wants that, he's got to give Ukraine the means to defend itself, because Ukraine had those means until President Trump took it away from him under the so-called pause. Let's hope that pause is lifted this week.
John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine, now director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council. Great to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Jerry's got in touch from the Isle of Wight saying he can't believe the world is in utter turmoil due to the whim of one convicted felon with dubious morals and a self-inflated ego. How did it come to this? He questions, saying that Europe, abandoned to potentially suffer the same fate as Ukraine and the rest of the world, too afraid or cowed to call out Mr. Trump for his self-serving, deluded policy decisions. And Naresh has also got in touch to say that Starmer and his European cohort thumping their chest is going to achieve nothing except more fatalities of innocent people in Russia and Ukraine. If Starmer thinks that Russia will capitulate anytime soon, then he's either very naive or ignorant of Russian history. Europeans, she says, have learnt nothing in the last 70 years. Good to hear from you all. Do keep your thoughts coming into us all the usual ways here on Times Radio.